This doesn't feel right. You know, I do sense that your outfit might be a little bit more spot on than mine. This is like I'm going to a Halloween party for sure.
Or a MAGA rally.
Or a MAGA rally. We made the effort for you. That's what really matters.
We are coming to you live from the heart of Deseret. We walked and sang as we did it to get here to talk about Mormonism's tradition of LARPing around as old-timey polygamists in the desert so that you can learn the value of not thinking for yourself.
Zelf.
On the shelf.
How are you doing today, Pioneer Sam?
Pretty good, Pioneer Tan. Do you want to do any more of your Swedish impression before we start?
Well, I'm wearing shorts, so it kind of looks like lederhosen. So, and yeah, I think that maybe I could be fit for the Swiss Alps. I'm not really sure. I think when I get back, I will think about it some more. Today we're talking about Trek. Did you go on Trek? I did. Did you go on Trek?
No.
They don't do that in England?
They don't do that in England. They do like girls' camp and like probably some version of boys' camp. I don't think they do Trek. I feel like everyone in England would... Like, it's in the church's best interests to not do Trek in England. It wouldn't go well for them in a country that already has a very low baptism rate. Like, that would become the whole centre of what people thought when they thought of their religion, because it's so weird. That would be like, oh, the Mormons, they're the ones that, like, dress up like the Amish and go, whatever.
I think the closer you get to Utah, like, the weirder things get. Like, a little further away in the States, they do Trek, but then in Utah, they do,
Just looking at our costumes.
So today we're going to be reading about your experiences from Trek. If you're interested in hearing the words from the horse's mouth from my own teenage journal, we're going to be continuing my Mormon...
horse mouth.
We're going to read about Trek from my teenage Mormon journal over on Patreon, so...
Which we are now putting content on.
Woohoo!
Before we were doing nothing, and many of you are still kind enough to support us, and so we thought we should do something.
Yeah, and so many people signed up last time as a result of the last video that we were like, okay, let's be better about this. So you've inspired us. Hopefully.
We're business bitches now.
We didn't cross the plains to sit on our asses. So the thing about it is the pioneers, like, for the most part, had an okay time. Like, some people died, but, like, a lot of people just, like, died back in the day from all kinds of things. But the, like, specific hard ones were, like, God is telling us to go right now to Zion. And it's like, we shouldn't go. We're going to be walking in the winter. And he's like, if you have faith, God will protect us. Oh. And then they, like... died on the way. That like so many people like froze to death or starved to death, just like this horrific situation, and we kind of tout it at this like, look what they did for God, and it's like, but they didn't have to do it. Like you could just as easily be like, that was a really stupid thing to do, and like let's learn from that rather than just being like, suffering is great, it's the best, God just like wants you to suffer as much as possible to test your faith.
So wait, they walked from where to where?
And
like New York?
They walked from Illinois to...
so they'd already moved from New York to Illinois.
Yeah, New York.
And that trek went okay.
To Illinois.
But it was the Utah leg that was the real...
I mean, it was tough all along. Mormons did not make for great neighbors. They'd show up and, like, totally disrupt local economies and totally displace residents. So like all of a sudden it's like, oh, my town is run by Mormons, like the Rajanishis.
Yeah, who's seen... What's that? Wild Wild Country. Yeah, who's seen Wild Wild Country?
Yeah, totally that same exact story. And they're like, this is our land and our town and what? Like, you only do business...
And we're marrying teenagers.
Yeah.
Multiple.
Your wife.
Okay, so, I mean, let's get into these Trek stories.
Let's do it. Okay.
As soon as my young women leaders announced it was time for Trek, I was terrified. No part of me wanted to go, and it filled me with anxiety. Yeah, were people, like, scared of Trek? Because it's, like, notoriously miserable?
Yeah, it's definitely infamous for being like, you're gonna starve, and we're gonna only feed you broth, and you're gonna work hard in the sun.
And your children, and this is legal somehow.
And they really try to build up the, like, weird... psychological aspects of it, like now only the women are gonna pull and all the men just have to watch and cry and think about how hard it would be for them when you have to go off to war.
Oh my god. I feel like if this is happening in England, there would be like an investigation into it because it's child abuse. You're like, anyway, we'll get into it. I remember telling my leaders I didn't want to go, but they blew me off and always said things like, you're just being high maintenance, you'll have such a good experience if you just grin and bear it.
That's what I said when I didn't want to hike the Grand Canyon in one night. I was like, that sounds
Didn't
miserable.
you end up doing it, though?
I ended up doing it, and it was the worst night of my life. To this day, the worst night.
They buried a baby doll in the middle of the forest, and Pa said an actual prayer about baby going to heaven. Some people cried. I've heard something about, like, is there like a Ma and Pa on, or everyone has roles?
Yeah. So the way it was organized in my stake was there was couples assigned to, like, be a family, and then they chose kids to go in which one, and the whole process was very revelatory. And God's told us which Ma and Pa you need to be with.
Wow. I don't remember details, but at one point the Indians were coming after us. I know they did war cry sounds. A woman was role-playing that she and her children were shoeless, and they asked some of us to volunteer to give up our shoes for part of the hike. I gave up mine.
Give up your shoes?
And I was like miserable. Child abuse.
That's a liability. That's so dangerous.
I felt so self-righteous, though. We were told the women would push alone up a hill. The men were called to war. But then halfway through, grown men dressed as angels came to help us.
That has to be Utah, where, like, if passersby saw it, they'd be like, ah, yes, trek. Instead of just like, what the...
Yeah. This person said, a health hazard. 90% of the people there were not physically fit enough to be there doing it, and people were dropping left and right from heat stroke and dehydration. I'm amazed the LDS Church is still letting them happen. It seems to be a major liability issue.
Yeah, no kidding. Because the whole point is, like, you should endure literally everything, including giving up your life to follow the prophet. So if you try to sue the prophet after doing this, you're actually going to go to hell.
At my trek, I was assigned as one of the oldest sisters, which meant I had to carry one of the baby dolls as we hiked.
The baby doll thing.
One of the baby dolls.
Wild.
Burying a baby doll in the forest. Sorry, we just glossed over that part. Then on our last day, one of the leaders read a story about the baby dying and took it out of my hands and buried it on the side of the road. Imagine if you're just a car driving past. It felt weird because, yeah, these are reenactments of the pioneers, but man, it was quite traumatizing for me, a 16-year-old girl at a time. Also, not to mention, we only ate carrots and a bunch of water for 6 hours that day. Honestly, don't know how I survived. Holy shit. I can't do a hike without snacks, without getting, like, low blood sugar.
In my stake, the time before, they do it, like, every 4 years. The time before they did it was, like, really intense, and I think they had, like, people passing out and stuff. So on this one, they're like, we're not going to starve you, but we are going to work you really hard. So we, like, ate enough. It was still just, like, you get a full cup of broth and a roll.
You're, like, hiking all day. You should be eating more than normal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember thinking something was wrong with me because everyone around me seemed to be having this profound spiritual experience while I found the whole thing strange and uncomfortable. We should probably talk a little bit about, like, the psychology of giving people in high-demand religions and cults a really intense experience like that where you're deprived of food and water and I assume sleep a little bit.
Yeah.
So basically just, like, depriving people of basic needs in a way to try and, like, facilitate a spiritual experience, which will happen in those intense situations.
Totally.
We weren't allowed to mess around or laugh very loud because we were on sacred land. All the adults were taking everything very seriously when everything we did seemed very silly to me. I have a very vivid memory of my trek ma hysterically crying when our flower baby died on the trail.
Oh my god.
Just imagine a fully grown adult woman, like, break crying I mean, these aren't actors. These are just, like, irregular people at church.
Fake news crisis actors.
Just overall, I didn't get anything out of it and felt like I wasted a week of my summer. It's a week? I thought it was, like, 2 days.
Yeah, it's a few days. I think at least 3. For some, it's more. Wow, do you think they were in Utah, the holy ground, or, like, winter's quarters or something?
I have no idea, but that's just so bullshit, because, like, kids on trek would have been able to laugh. Do you know, like, in the real thing, the pioneers, I mean.
Pioneers' children sang as they walked and walked and
you'd
walked.
Have to.
And laughed.
During trek, we didn't carry water to drink, only small cups we could fill up every so often. We were only fed ramen broth, no noodles, and biscuits for 2 nights. So kids had cramps, and some became faint from too large of calorie deficits. This is such bullshit. Several of my friends passed out on trek. I was covered in ticks with no one checking in routinely after long stretches.
I'm so scared of ticks.
Me too. The emotional trauma from having adults watch us as young fucking girls push heavy equipment up an exasperated hillside. Where do I begin? I don't know if you guys had the girls' pool that last day, but we had all the men and adults leave, and only the young girls were made to carry and push all of the handcarts and luggage up a steep hillside to recreate when men left to join the war. What war?
The Mexican War.
The Mexican War?
We were at war with Mexico.
Who was? America?
The United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's like what the Alamo. You know, remember the Alamo?
So a lot of Mormons had to leave to go to
or as you may know it, Alamo!
I don't know
whatever.
What you're talking about at all.
I think there's ABBA songs. I think Fernanda's about the Alamo.
Oh, okay.
The fateful night we crossed the Rio Grande.
Oh. There was something in the air that night. The stars. There's no need to be Swedish.
They are Swedish.
Yeah, but they don't say the stars. Okay, anyway, all adults I respected watched us struggle immensely, and even as I look back now, in no way was this massive undertaking left on the shoulders of preteens/teen girls, so it just seemed like torture in an attempt of invoking that spirit feeling.
Hey yo, ain't that the truth?
Someone just said butt chafing. That was a Czech experience.
They had us cross a glacial river in the rain. This was Canada, so summer is not at all that warm regardless, and glacial rivers are freezing cold year-round. I would literally get hypothermia and die.
Yeah,
I get so cold.
So horrible.
Almost everyone got soaked. Almost everyone's stuff got soaked. Oh, and there was a bridge right there that all the leaders crossed while the youth went through the river. Boo!
Oh my god, this is such child abuse.
And yet, if they watched like Jesus Camp or those like Christian organizations where they like whack you with a chair so you can feel the pain that Jesus went through, you'd be like, wow, that's abuse. But like,
yep, they think
because this is more like long-term sustained
abuse,
that it's okay. One girl fell in and got swept downstream. Luckily, it got a bit more shallow and she found her footing and was okay, but soaked in cold water when it was probably max 60 degrees out and raining.
What the okay,
I can't believe
sounds like
that.
Like, it doesn't sound like something that any kid is really excited to do.
No. But that's the idea, is like the pioneers had to do this, and it's like, no, the pioneers would have taken the bridge that the leaders took.
Like, I think I just thought, like, oh, some treks were too intense. But I think, like, this, I'm realizing that suffering is the point.
Yeah.
But it just feels so unethical to subject children to this against their will.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
Especially
God.
for such calculated ends. Kind of like what we were saying, like, lots of religious traditions do similar, like, extremities to get into a spiritual mindset or whatever, like fasting or, you know, things like that. But, like, to say that this suffering, they use it in such a calculated way to, like, reinforce such bad, harmful, false ideas.
It really highlights why people like us want to keep talking about Mormonism, because there's stuff like this, like kids get hurt.
Yeah.
It has a real life impact on people, you know?
Yeah. On the other side of the river, we had to throw together makeshift pulleys to hoist our hand carts and stuff up a hill that was probably about 20 feet tall at about a 70 to 90 degree slope. I remember going, they like try to find the steepest slope because it's like, how can we make this as challenging as possible? It really is kind of like a sociopic practice that like men getting together and be like, how can we really make these teens suffer to know, you know, how much they should really get off for the profit.
Yeah.
3 kids got medically diagnosed with hypothermia.
Oh my God.
But everyone else was soaked in freezing cold. That would have been me. I would have been like...
That is so... Ugh, keep going.
I asked to call my parents when we got back to our camp. They refused. Oh, you do not know your rights as a Mormon youth or a Mormon at all.
You do not.
It's just like, well, if this is what God wants, I guess my legs can fall off. My bishop came that night for testimony meeting. I begged him to give me a ride home. He actually seemed like he might oblige, but then the other leaders stepped in, and then I was told I wasn't allowed. Many kids slept in wet and damp sleeping bags that night. Luckily, no one got seriously injured or sick, but kids could have died of hypothermia, and one girl almost drowned.
Oh my God.
So let's be real, not a safe situation. Not to mention the mental trauma. The first night, they had a mob come through the night complete with gunshots.
Oh, the Indians?
Or an angry mob, like, we're gonna kill the Mormons, which I don't think really happened to the
really
pioneers.
Solidify that persecution complex.
They're dressed as liberals. Come through the night, complete with gunshots. They were obviously firing blanks.
Forced to go when I was 17, we trekked in Wyoming and the leaders didn't plan for severe weather in June. The first evening, there was a wind and snowstorm and I got severe windburn, sunburn, skin damage on my face, and it also caused an eye infection. There was a giant white tent they had all of us sleeping in, but one side of it collapsed halfway through the night. Several kids asked to be able to call parents and go home, but we were told that was the adversary tempting us and that we weren't allowed to leave.
Jesus. Your needs and desires... Satan.
Fuck 'em. My kneecap popped out the last day. No one could figure out what was wrong, so I walked 3 miles with it out of place. And literally...
With a kneecap popped out?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. My wife and I got drafted to be a ma and pa on a trek on the west side of Utah Lake, right in the middle of a faith crisis. The theme of the trek seemed to be do what you're told, even if you know it's wrong, even if it turns out horribly. That is the message of the pioneers. Yeah. One of the approved stories for trek leaders talked, and that's in quotes, so I guess that was like a really official approved stories. That's wild. Talked about the Willie Company, who left too late in the season and who suffered greatly for it. James Willie, the captain, told the group to trust in his leadership and go forward regardless of suffering, even to death. Levi Savage, who was very experienced, told them it was a terrible idea and basically a death sentence. The group thought that they should trust the Lord and their leaders and went forward anyway. Levi said, "What have I said I know to be true? What I have said I know to be true, but seeing you are to go forward, I will go with you. I will help you all I can. We'll work with you, we'll rest with you, we'll suffer with you, and if necessary, we'll die with you." 68 people froze to death, but Levi was a hero because he was obedient. We ended up reliving the story that weekend, except instead of freezing to death, the majority of our group got heat exhaustion in the Utah desert, and one of our counselors who was overweight with diabetes got taken to an emergency room in an ambulance.
Oh my god.
We certainly got the moral of the story and had left the church by the end of the year.
Holy shit.
Glad that was the push you needed. Jeez. We look kind of the part, maybe not the cowboy hat if you had like a... But... Like, Mormons going on trek, they just dress up like an FLDS person.
Yeah,
it's like,
I know.
Let that sink in.
Let it sink in.
Also, funny how none of the handcart company were polygamous. And where was our coffee ration?
My trek experience was essentially every young woman's nightmare. I got my first period during trek.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
We're all thinking the same thing. I was obviously completely mortified, and because I had no way of expecting it and taking precautions, I ruined a very nice lady in our stakes pioneer-style underdressings, which she had let me borrow.
Let that be a lesson to you.
They didn't let me go home! I was experiencing heavy bleeding and cramps for the very first time, and we were hiking in the heat all day, but leadership was very strict on reasons for allowing people to leave and encouraged us to pray as the pioneers had prayed. I was reminded by one of the trek mothers that pioneer girls would have experienced this too. It was treated like my perfect trial and such a faith-building experience. Being young, I just went with it and stopped asking to go home, but it was pretty miserable. In conclusion, fuck trek.
Oh god, mine was 36 miles total. Jesus. In July, in a mountain with no shade or rivers. We walked 17 miles the first day, and on the second day I had heat stroke and had to be driven 5 miles on the trail.
Oh my god.
The trail we were on already had 3 other treks. Have people helicoptered out for heat stroke that summer alone.
What the fuck? The local authorities are probably like, what the fuck's happening? Why are we helicoptering all these kids out?
No, and they're like, oh yeah, trek.
Oh, because they're all Mormon?
Yeah, trek, and we're stimulating the local helicopter economy. They told me I needed that heat stroke to understand God's plan for me and to fully understand my ancestors' struggle.
I mean, to be fair, you did do that sweat lodge that one time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like...
But you chose as a consenting adult and no one forced you.
Yeah, that's the difference is like the coercion, because it's like, yeah, you can choose to do that if you want, but it's like, it truly is so coercive. Everything in Mormonism is like, you have to set an example for the other teens, and...
My brothers and I all got hypothermia because our leaders thought checking the weather wouldn't provide an authentic experience. In an effort to get an early start the next day, they packed up all our blankets and warm clothes the night before. We slept under the stars, which was fine when it was warm, but woke up in a snowstorm with our clothes and sleeping bags soaked through. Our leaders were convinced the snow would stop soon and refused to unload the handcart for us to get our dry clothes and coats. Long story short, after walking for 2 hours in these conditions, we wound up with hypothermia and spent the rest of the day in the medic truck.
It's fundamentalist cosplay from hell.
From
that sucks.
hell.
The worst LARPing experience ever.
One of my friends fell while pushing a cart and almost got run over. Another friend got her fingers crushed between two carts and needed stitches. Someone in my family got really sick because he had asthma. These are just some of the things that I heard about, but there were so many people who got sick or injured. Honestly, I'm surprised no one died or had to be hospitalized.
This is honestly like... This is no different than like the self-flagellation of those like Catholic sects that like whip themselves, or there's people in Latin America who would recreate the crucifixion scene and would like get whipped to be like, that's what Jesus went through. Like, this really isn't that different.
I thought isn't you doing that making him suffer more, because then he has to suffer for it when you go for it too. Leave Jesus alone. I had a really bad eating disorder and was still forced to go despite being in hospital 6 months prior and still not being allowed to properly exercise as part of my recovery. That is so bad. Ooh. In hospital 6 months prior, and you're going to put this girl on like a 400 calorie diet. From what it sounds like, that could easily launch you back into a full-blown eating disorder, because you get like a rush from like...
Oh, yeah.
My mum justified it by giving me extra food and prayer. I still lost 2 kilograms. That's like 4.4 pounds, I think. Which, if you've just been hospitalized for an eating disorder 6 months ago, you can't afford to lose 4 pounds. No. It's like blowing my mind out. Every single story basically is just like horrific. Mm-hmm. I started throwing up from stress, heat, and hunger the first night. The last day we were fed 3 pita chips, and our ma and pa snuck us some lemon heads. While starving us the last day, they had us sit in the sun by ourselves for over an hour to read our scriptures. Mm-hmm. They had our parents write us their testimonies and gave them to us to read them. They got my inactive mum to write to tell me how much she wanted me to stay in the church. All the time I thought I felt the spirit. I looked back later and realized it was heat stroke and hunger. I remember it being over 100 degrees the entire time we were there. We had heavy hand carts we would push for hours during the hottest part of the day in literal circles with no actual destination. Uh-huh. There was no shade anywhere, just brush and sand and dirt. We would make stops randomly throughout our trip where leaders would reenact real-life pioneer scenarios, like having to share food or certain family members dying so they couldn't help push the carts. There were different groups of young men and women who were families, and each family had a child or two, which was a sack of flour they were only allowed to carry. They had to make sure the flour didn't burst or anything, otherwise they'd have to bury it. People would get...
Oh no, I had to lose all this extra weight.
People would get overly sentimental about burying their flour sack babies.
Someday, some like future robot archaeologist is going to uncover in the Utah desert all these like plastic babies and flour and be like, what were they doing?
On the second day, I passed out from heat exhaustion. It was not uncommon for this to happen, and a few other people had passed out as well. I remember being taken to some small building on site, probably some state park office, where I got to sleep in the AC and eat something, which was the best part of the whole trip. One of the last nights, there was a big testimony meeting in this little canyon we were camping by. Everyone was exhausted and hungry, so it amplified the testimonies of everyone. It just felt like a big brainwashing fest. The rest of it was a huge blur. It ended up being a huge mess for our steak, and they never did it again, to my knowledge. This was around 2007.
Thank God.
Like, how many of these do we read? There's so many.
I don't know. Trek was the worst. I lived in Las Vegas, and our trek was in the middle of the Nevada desert in the summer. They made us walk out of our way to cross a small creek 3 times just for funsies. To cross it 3 times?
When someone said they made you push the handcarts round and round in circles, like, you don't even get the satisfaction of like ending up at a specific destination.
No. It's a loop. That's what we did. Just a big
What the
circle.
fuck?
Yep.
That sucks. I at least thought there would be some kind of like, this is the place moment at the end.
No. They didn't allow us to bring tents to sleep in, and there were so many mosquitoes. I can still feel the itch, and we were sleeping on a giant field of cow shit. We weren't allowed to bring our own snacks. We could only eat what the leaders allocated for each family, and not every family was given food. I remember there was like some controversy about whether you should wear sunscreen or whether you should use toothpaste, because it was like, that's not authentic.
Or like, presumably the pioneers didn't have bug spray. Mm-hmm. The trek was cancelled the year after I went because someone got pregnant while on trek.
Oh, was it an immaculate conception or?
Another girl saying she came on her period, and due to bucket limitations, I barely had enough pads. Didn't have any ibuprofen and was just straight up miserable. So they didn't even let her have enough like products to handle her period.
Horrible. You know what I'm surprised we haven't heard yet is about the people who have to like kill chickens. That was a big theme for a long time. Like they didn't do it when I was there, but the time before they had like, you have to chop off this chicken's head and defeather it so you can eat it.
They had us carry a baby doll the whole time. One of the girls always had to hold the baby. It was very traumatic because at the end of Trek we had to bury this doll and everyone was crying and we had to sing God Be With You Till We Meet Again. When you're 14 years old, that's just a little bit traumatic. That was not the worst part of Trek, however. It was the first time I came to really see that women were seen as weak in the church. We crossed a small man-made river that was only a few feet deep. I was perfectly capable of walking across. The men had to carry the women, regardless of how the women felt.
I was asked to speak to the stake about our Trek experience. And I remember talking about seeing the sisters do the pull, and it's like, and then...
I don't get it.
Me neither.
We don't get it. We're trying to figure it out, Siri. I got to the part where I was like, and when I saw my sisters...
I can just imagine you saying Okay, I just remembered that we're gonna film your Trek journal entry over on Patreon, and I'm like so burnt out from all these Trek stories. Also, we have so many more, but I feel like they're all the same. Just like,
oh, we had the worst nightmare desert experience.
I didn't want to stop reading because I'm sure there's there's more in there that are even worse. Like it's just when you think you've heard the worst, you haven't.
Well, if you want to hear the perspective of a Mormon youth who absolutely love Trek, jump on over to Patreon. We're gonna be reading my journals here. It's gonna get wild. Also, what I would like to hear about, and maybe we can field questions next time, is not the Treks, but like the bizarro, like Book of Mormon. Like there's some people who like build the Book of Mormon forts and like fight the Lamanites and shit. Like
Battery's dying. Say
so
goodbyes.
if you got a weird Mormon cosplay LARPing experience that's not Trek, tell us about it. Or tell us about your Trek experience in the comments below.
Do a thumbnail.
As always, like and subscribe. What's our thumbnail?